Welcome to Travel Around the Block. Join Joel, Mike, and their guests as they explore how Web3 and AI are reshaping the way we journey, invest, and connect across the globe.
All right, welcome back to Travel Around the Block, where we dive deep in travel tech at the intersection of Web3 and AI. So this week, we're super excited to welcome one of our most innovative founders that I'm really excited to have on this show because we're going to talk about some really, really interesting things. Vikas is the co-founder and CEO of Neoke. Neoke builds digital identity infrastructure for the seamless, secure, and frictionless travel experience. So they empower travelers with control over their verified data. We're obviously going to get a lot deeper into that, but that's kind of the high-level elevator pitch, if you will. But before Neoke, Vikas actually spent about 20 years in travel, so he has a deep and broad experience in the travel industry. He spent a lot of time at Booking.com, I believe almost a decade, where he rose to become the managing director for Asia Pacific. He drove major growth there, and he has held several senior roles at the hospitality chains. I believe Kempinski and Hyatt are the two among them. And Vikas, I think you also went to Harvard Business School, is that right?
Is correct.
All right. Well, first of all, welcome to the show, Vikas.
Pleasure is all mine. Super excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
So Vikas, I know I went really quick on your bio, if you will, and a little bit on Neoke. We're obviously going to get really into it. But yeah, with that said, can you just give us a high level background on your journey, how you got into travel and how basically, you started Neoke and where was Vikas 10 years ago and where you are now?
Yeah, by the way, you did a phenomenal job introducing myself. Probably I wouldn't have been able to, do better than that. So kudos for that. I mean, 10 years ago, I was this kid on the block, if you would say, was really thinking about how to make it easier for people to experience travel. How to remove friction for people so more and more people can travel and get the experiences of their lives and, somehow, get better in their lives and their in the outlook of life. That's what happened to me when I started to travel. So, it just brings a very different perspective. You understand different cultures. But if you think about travel, how it is structured today, it's full of friction. And 10 years ago, I always dreamt about there will be a moment in time when there will be more connected experiences. People will be able to travel between countries when we don't have to go through these, in-market checks and balances, if you would want to call it, thinking about what it actually means and just framing that problem. You start even today and 10 years ago, it was exactly the same. Not a lot has changed. If you start your search, you start your search on one platform, book your flights on another, cars on another, hotels in another, and every step of the way, you somehow, expressing who you are. This is your information. This is who you were before, while planning. And the next step is, okay, I have planned my trip. I want to go here. And then you have a few more platforms to coordinate the whole experience with. So there's really no interoperability of data. There's no context of you floating across different touch points. And the onus is on you to bring all of those things together. So on the booking funnel, the more upper funnel side of the story. But when you start traveling, that's where the real mess starts, right? When you start traveling, you get stuck at the airport, wanting to ask where are your documents? Are you eligible to travel? Are you really who you say you are? And, people looking at you and judging you in different ways. There's no digital trust, perhaps. And then even if you go through the airport story, that's not it. If you get a car, same story, you get stuck. It's really, verifying who you are. Do you have certain documents with you? And the next step would be to go to the hotel in the same story. The cycle continues. So I think the challenge that inspired me to work in this direction was to think about how could we remove this friction? How could we establish digital trust and make it easier for people to experience travel? So that's just why I do what I do on a daily basis. And 10 years ago, this is what I was working on. And 10 years later, I'm working on with a different flavor. But I guess the problem still persists.
So is that how Neoke started? Essentially, 10 years ago, you're having this frustration. You're like, how do you solve this? Was this something that you had a very clear vision on, or you kind of understood like the market pain point and then you started working towards a solution? Just trying to get a better sense of how did Neoke actually come about? What was the catalyst that surfaced this opportunity for you?
Of course, 10 years ago, at that time, I was working at Booking, and Booking became this, very large company.
Mhm.
And it did a phenomenal job by connecting diverse supply across the world, right? Brought it into one funnel
Right.
through which you can search, book, and enjoy your travel. And in that moment in time, the work that we were doing is that, okay, well, let's connect the dots from vertical supply integration of different types of products bundled into one, which makes lives easier for people. But when I left and, post COVID, perhaps, the experience of traveling became almost traumatic, right? That you got to have the COVID certificates, you're checked so many different times, and when I started to travel it after COVID or between COVID, I was even moving countries and moved from Singapore to Europe. It was quite clear that this friction is going to persist unless something is done about it, right? And there were good learnings that came by establishing some trust in COVID credentials, and that was good. That was a good model to think about how all this could be orchestrated. And when I landed in Europe, I got involved with a foundation called Digital Identity or Decentralized Identity Foundation. And I started to work with them on defining some white papers on how could digital identity actually transform travel. And that's when it all clicked. And I felt there is perhaps an opportunity to inverse the business model. What I mean by that is that today you go to platforms based on the needs, and in the way of the future, and this, of course, AI being that catalyst or let's say an accelerator, where the services can be bundled and provided to you based on who you are, what you unlock in a way, from offers to personalization to access. So I think that was the thinking process, and now the question, of course, is how do you start? And that's when we started to think about, okay, we perhaps need to build trust where the friction is the most, and a lot of work was going on at that time, which was in the aviation space. So that was kind of like the how Neoke came about, where we basically came and expressed, hey, look, we got to solve this problem. We are a challenger and an innovator. The industry is really slow, long sales cycle, long implementation cycle, a lot of foundation, regulatory bodies to overcome. And there was nobody who was looking at it from that angle of the connected trip and bringing them together. And we felt this is a great opportunity to do so. And that's when we got together and started building Neoke.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly agree. Just as a, a traveler, international, domestic traveler on my own, I don't think a lot of people recognize how much friction there is when it comes to travel because you're just so used to this is the status quo, this is the way it is. I just have to deal with it, right? So, for example, like one of the big mistake I made last year when I was going to Japan was I knew that I was going to be in Japan for a few months. I knew that I was going to rent a car to drive around. I knew that I wanted to rent a motorcycle so I can ride around
Mhm.
Japan as well. So I went to AAA and I got my international driver's permit, right? Stamped,
Mhm.
boom, done. Get to Japan and they're like, no, we can't rent you a car because you don't have the right stamp. And I'm like, no, I have the right stamp. They're like, no, you only have the motorcycle stamp. You don't have the car stamp. And of
Oh,
course, I'm
okay.
already in Japan, so boom, my car reservation, everything's schedule changed because I can't, they will not give me a car, right? It's not like Thailand or Indonesia where they don't really care as much and they just let you go ahead and do that.
Yeah.
I didn't have that. I didn't even know that my first time going to
Yeah.
Indonesia. I get to the airline desk and they're like, show us your outbound ticket. I'm like, oh my God, I don't have a
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
I quickly fake booked a ticket right there at the desk just to prove. But the point I guess I'm trying to make is that there's all these different friction points as travelers you might not know about unless you're really good at,
Yeah.
and obviously now you can probably just go to like AI and ask like, hey, I'm going here. Is there anything I need when it
Yeah.
comes to e-visas, when it comes to any type of vaccination requirements, etc., right? And then you have all these tickets and documents that you need to store somewhere. I guess I just want to paint that picture in terms of some of the friction I personally experienced and maybe the opportunity to kind of describe the solution that Neoke is solving in a layman terms way, in kind of like a traveler's journey way of like, this is the pain point now. And with Neoke, with the technology of digital ID that, suppliers, airlines, and hotels or tours and activities, et cetera, is going to be able to adopt, like what are the friction that's going to be removed and what are some of the, value propositions for travelers?
Yeah, yeah. Fantastic and great story as well. I mean, you illustrated quite a few problems there, right? One of the problems is, what are the needs, what are the document needs for you to fulfill the trip that you've booked or you want to go through? And that changes, of course, user by user, depending on nationality, depending on the type of travel. Are you traveling with your family or not? So the first complication is that when you start to kind of strip down all these permutations and combinations of identity data, data about health, data about visas, data about different types of documents needed for a type of service, it becomes really complex. But like you pointed out, AI is actually one of those levers to bring all of this together. And some of the work that we've been working on, a product called Lyra, which is logical identity and reasoning agent, which basically assesses and expresses these are the document needs for the type of trip you having. And it breaks it down based on the type of service you're going through. The second part of the funnel is how do we trust the documents that you have? Like I said, there's stamps missing. And I mean, in today's expression, I think fairly borders and airports and yeah, generally by manual checks, passport is kind of identified, right? So you have different tools to do that. But just by passport identifying through a scanner or forensic type of algorithm is not enough, right? So how do you trust that? Because it could be an AI generated document as well. What we've added in working with International Civil Aviation Office to be able to extract data from the chip of the passport and then match the chip of the passport if this is actually correct and cryptographically signed by the authority that issued it, and it holds true today. And then doing the biometric checks to be really compliant. And there are also many others checks that goes in there, which I would keep it as a black box to not scare the audience. And expresses that really you are you. And this credential is trusted or verified and validated in the best capacity possible and have a digital path through the airport. It's just taking airport as a use case. So that's point number one. And then the second part of it is the visa. Now, visas are so complicated. They are pasted on the passport. They're sometimes issued on a paper. There's sometimes a QR code. Sometimes it's in an app. Sometimes there are complications like it needs to be in color and only one side printed. So, and the data formats change, and the language, of course, can be still, can be solved through translations. But what I'm trying to kind of express is there's so much fragmentation that it literally becomes really hard to bring all of that together. The only way to kind of do this is today manual, that you look at it and you look at the other, and somebody's going to look at you and they're going to match all those points. And obviously, that's not foolproof. And that's why so much friction exists. So the work that we're doing around this is to really create this risk and decisioning capability. And that's part of the work that we do. Now, once these credentials are issued, obviously the cost to manage this is huge. Now, let's just take an example of a large airport, and let's just take an example of an airport like a Heathrow or INA in Spain or stuff like that. And with those airports, average revenue for those airports about 1.2, 1.5 billion annually. Close to about 30 to 45 euros are spent per passenger on just processing. And that accounts to roughly 700 to 800 million in cost. So the 1.5 billion in is not in revenue, is in EBITDA margins. So if you are starting to then reduce these costs significant, even by 5, 8, 10%, it's straight away hits you on your bottom line. So I think there's a real use case on the cost efficiencies and the passenger experience and and also even understanding the passengers a bit better. So a high value passenger, somebody who's been through 15, 20 times and you would have done that. You want those guys to be in the airport, in the airside, so that, they are able to spend their money on food, beverages, shopping, or or in the lounge. So I think you want them to move forward fairly quickly. So part of that process is trusting the credentials. The second part of the process is how do you store these credentials? Because the cost has to be, if you want to reuse these credentials, then the costs reduces significantly, right? And these are expensive products and full of friction as well, like, to onboard and stuff like that. So a part of the proposition is where we offer a wallet, which can be embedded in any application that basically does storage of these credentials that are trusted. And then, and in the next time you want to travel in a very secure and a trusted way, in a standard created by IATA, or the International Air Transport Association, called IATA One ID, enables that interoperability and trust of that credential. So that's where we are. Last year, we did now, of course, this is a really new way to travel, right? And orchestrated via biometrics. So it's just kind of, I didn't give that caveat that part of that credential trust is built on biometrics. And the sharing of the credentials is also built on biometrics, that you are really sharing this credential for the intended purpose that you're sharing it for. And I don't want to get into the consent and authorization, because that's another governance layer that we're working on very deeply. So the wallet then is stored in these applications, which enable the orchestration of these credentials for the intended purpose and use. Sometimes it's one airport, sometimes it's two airports, and sometimes it's three connections, because you're going to go from one to the other, or transit and then go to your last destination. And airline, sometimes that is a change, and then you have to keep giving those credentials over and over again. So last year we did a proof of concept with Hong Kong Airport, Narita Airport in Tokyo, and Cathay Pacific, and we're able to showcase passenger journey between Hong Kong and Tokyo without any document check, with pre-airport authorization on phone, and then you just walk through. And that was one of the first use cases, even though the passenger count was relatively low. But what it showcased was critical systems interoperability. And I think that was monumental.
So the traveler going from one airport to another airport with the same airline, no documentation. I'm assuming from a security, gate, everything is biometric to.
Right. Yeah.
So for me, obviously, I'm already super excited about a future of travel like this, because in the
Yeah.
past few months, I've been going through different airports, and I was in St. Lucia, and
Yeah.
getting out of the airport in St. Lucia, it took literally 2 hours. I mean, the
Right.
security line, the immigration line, it was crazy. And the funny thing was that there was these kiosks that was not even powered on, sitting on the side. I'm assuming they're like implementing it soon. But obviously, that is one of those major friction points that you're talking about from a traveler
Yeah.
experience, is to be able to get through very quickly. And then obviously from an airport perspective, if you can have a traveler get through security and into the terminal, they have more time to potentially food and beverage, lounge experience, or maybe shop and so forth, right? So there's a lot like financial impact on that front as well.
Just within the stakeholders, right? So you have a part of that story with airlines. Airlines have the liability to ensure that the documents have been checked before the passenger goes through. And in the end, the liability still lies with them as well. So I think that's also, added cost to the whole funnel and friction.
Yeah.
So I think the cool bit around this is that even if you like, what we're differentiating ourselves with, first of all, a lot of these providers that offer these, biometric machines, obviously have done a phenomenal job connecting all these different touch points. However, they're not software companies. They don't know, what it means to run B2C products, how to kind of define and create experiences. So the experiences are done on hardware. So the hardware experiences are that you go over there, you put your passport generates some feed, that feed then needs to be matched, and then you go. If that is the case where there's no onboarding, but the visas are not checked, and some of the other documents are not checked, and then
Right.
they are checked, and then becomes that challenge. It does not solve the problem. And the other part of this story is that if you do want to get yourself biometrically enrolled, there are kiosks where you still have to line up and get yourself biometrically enrolled. And I think what we're trying to basically do is that, how can we actually get that user to be biometrically ready before they even step into the airport? So our niche here is pre-airport. And I think that not only just, I mean, today we are very concentrated on the aviation, but I mean, once that is done, I mean, the orchestration capabilities obviously brings forth a really new value within the ecosystem.
I still remember when I went through my global entry application process, very friction in a way because you have to go ahead and fill all the form online, wait for them to kind of pre-approve you, and then you get a notification that you're approved for like an interview, and then you have to pick which airport you're going to go to get that interview done. So you physically take half a day, go to the airport, sit, wait for them to call you. It's kind of like, going to the DMV and getting your license in a way, right? But boom, they literally asked me like 3 or 4 questions. Boom, I'm done. And then a few hours later, I get a notification, my global entry is approved and so forth. If you look at
Yeah.
travel and that kind of experience versus, let's say, if we take like a Web3 crypto world where they do KYC in app on the
Right.
phone, right? You upload
Right.
your ID and then the camera takes it, so they capture the biometrics from that perspective. I can see that happening for airports, hotels, and
Absolutely.
so for anything that requires you to prove you are who you are from a booking perspective, and you're able to and you have the right documentation and everything.
The challenge in those two use cases that you just described, payments, there are very defined rules already in payments around KYC, around, what type of information is needed to open a bank account. It's fairly consistent. Borders are also consistent but conservative in a lot of ways. Here, the challenge is it's just money that gets lost. The situation could be much more severe. So they're generally slower to adapt. However, we moving in that direction, per se. The risk profiling is different. And eventually we're going to get there. And I think we're building all these different pipes to power that risk and decisioning as we go along. But you're right that as we tread along, the experience would be somewhat similar. And the protocol here, like you, yeah, I'm sure you've heard of open banking, right?
Mhm.
Open banking basically says, a bank issues a credit card, that's a trusted one, and that is acceptable anywhere you go. And that's the verifier that open banking provides. And that can be orchestrated with ledgers with a Mastercard and Visa or Amex. And also, like, the movement and identity is managed by the bank, right? So there's a lot of like checks and balances before, that transaction happens at the back end. Now, in identity world, there's a new formulation of a standard. It's not new, OpenID, and that's what's getting scaled right now. So backing up on that, bringing in different formats, and the challenge of going a little bit technical is that there's a lot of fragmentation of these identity standards, right? So on the booking level, it's FIDO identity or the Google, the SSO, and the COP standards. But when it comes to the data interoperability, there are very fragmented standards. And if you really have to unlock global interoperability, there needs to be a platform that operates by piping all these different standards. And that's one of our focus to get there. And we're really there. And that's one of our core value proposition as well. Now, of course, the adoption is going to unlock that network effect. And that's what we right now focused on. The funny thing is that the moment you get one partner, you automatically unlock millions of users. So, we signed we will announce that in a bit, but we signed one of the biggest airport hubs in Asia, 70 million passengers a year, 100 airlines connected to another 100 airports. So, the network effects start to play out in that way. But yeah, I mean, it's not ready to scale yet. It's still at this point where we have to tread carefully, which is hard for a startup, frankly, because startup feeds on momentum. But at the same time, what we're also seeing is that there's a lot of willingness for airlines and airports to say, okay, we need to move the needle. Because frankly speaking, 4 to 6% global growth year on year CAGR for the next 10 years will lead us to a path of people that we cannot process in the current way. And that adds a lot of competition in the market as well, which is a good thing because competition will breed momentum as well.
So I think the vision that you're bringing to life is going to be super interesting to everyone listening. It's something that each in our way we've experienced or relate to, either a minor delay through the airport or much worse experiences. It's just very relevant work. And if I could play a different perspective on it, someone in the audience will say, "Hey, we've been hearing about frictionless travel and connected trips and you name it, slogan du jour for years. And I'm curious if you could offer perspective. I think you're probably well positioned to educate us about this. What has been the barrier in the past? We've talked about frictionless forever, but why has it never come to the fore? And what has changed that makes it now possible? So I guess the simplest way to ask it is, why should the audience believe this time that that frictionless world is actually approaching when they maybe have heard that a number of times in the past? And I'm not being contrarian. I'm just trying to give you a chance to illuminate the issue.
There's no trust in that word connected trip anymore. Because frankly, people have burnt their hands so many times, you know, because of that. So, but I think what our hypothesis here is digital trust will unlock network effects, and I say that quite often. And think about the signals that you do not capture today. If you are in the planning environment, you do not capture your planning behavior. If you're in a booking environment of a hotel, you're not capturing your booking behavior when you book a hotel. If you're in OTA searching booking, you'll be surprised the amount of data that exists over there. It's non-transferable. Businesses do not even know how to use that data really effectively. And a part of the problem is that the connections or the integrations, first view is my data, I don't want to share it. Second view is regulatory and compliance. How do we make that happen? And the third layer is fragmentation in terms of integrations. So the only way to solve, if you're going to go business by business, say, connect the dots, forget about it, it's not going to happen. The only way it can work is when there's a new infrastructure that exists that is able to kind of understand, define memory and context for you, acts on your behalf in a lot of ways, and we could, call that as an agent if you may. But a vault of your information that is smart and is able to provide that information to the next best action will unlock a lot of good things for you. Personalization to the point T. You are able to understand this is my context today. You have no context of your own. If I would ask you, Mike and Joel, what type of a traveler you are, if you ask booking what type of a traveler you are, you'll get immediate answer, of what type of a traveler you are based on your historical context. So I think those are the things that that perhaps if we flip the model of ownership of that information with the user, that orchestration can take place. Now, why? And another layer around this is the willingness to open the infrastructure or like open the environments. I think this is going to get even further worse, in my opinion, in the age of AI. Like some conversations I've been having with some of our partners, they're very worried. They are saying, "What's our moat?" In the age of AI, like how do we defend? And every partner has some kind of goal signals that they own, right? So if you go to a planning site, they have reviews and, a verified reviewer and, you have certain trust signals over there. Then in the booking funnel, you have other type of trust signals like loyalty program and the amount of bookings you've made in the last year and things like that. If you're a credit card company, what type of a member you are, a platinum or a centurion, and the amount of money you've spent. All of those things are signals that will unlock access and value for you as a traveler. So I think those are some of the things that are monetizable even in the age of AIs. But I think where we headed towards, and a few 2 days ago or something like that, Amadeus announced that they're going to close their developer connectivity platform and make it bold. Like now, that is a clear signal of how platforms are thinking about preserving their own moat, so they stay relevant, and it's not probably healthy. So I think those are some of the challenges that we have to overcome. I think that the future of travel in tech would be quite literally built on vertical agents performing a specific action as a service. That is going to be a real powerful grid, if you may. The rest of the communication side, the LLM wars, let's just put it like this, is going to be largely tuning, and each model will offer a different tune that suits you. But underneath of that, you would need agents that perform. So if somebody has to build a business, then ideally an agent that works for a particular stream and performs a particular task. and that is open. That's the problem to solve, in my opinion.
Thank you, Vikas. And as I listen to that, I can't help but think about context. I think you mentioned the word context at least once or twice in there. And I
Yeah.
wonder if we could just tease that out a little bit further. How important is context and retention of context to the vision of how you think this should all work? And are there any to retained context? Like how do you think a traveler should look at that subject?
We're in a unique position that the privacy infrastructure is really state of the art. It's government grade for us, right? And what we are being working on is to build a memory MCP layer. And what does that mean is that that layer is utilized to understand who you are as a traveler in the context of that transaction. And I think that's very powerful. So work in progress, nothing to share right now, but we're prototyping it, and we're still in a proof of concept stage with one of the largest OTAs in the world, and we're excited about it. So privacy here would mean that you are really the owner of that context, and you're sharing that context for the service you're going to get, and that's it. And your context and memory gets elevated based on the touch points you're going to have, and you deciding the level, the MCP or the agent could potentially decide that this is probably the right context for the type of service you want to book, but then at the same time making sure that context comes back to you and your memory gets elevated, right? So that's the basic core of this story. And I think one of the things, Joel and Mike, which is missing in this layer of privacy and the layer of transparency, is you don't know how your data is used. You have no idea. You do not know who's using your data for what type of things. And I think one of the things that we guys are focusing on, especially in the upper funnel, of course, also in the wallet scenarios at the airport and airline, is utilizing what type of information and why. And you can decide that I don't want to share this information on a regular basis. But the brands that you like, you could really selectively disclose that this is the information I would want to share with these brands to get more offers. And today they are like wild, wild west, right? So you sign up and you get like vanilla, right? Emails and personalizations, offers, let's just put it like this. And those offers may not be relevant to you. So it's not the bombarding of the offers that is going to actually convert. What's going to convert is that you have a direct relationship of some sorts with that provider. So, I mean, still very early stages, Joel, and I don't know if we will solve it as a company, but I think this is one of those things that will move the needle over a period of time. Yeah, it's not at the top of the mind for a lot of players, but for some, where survival becomes like a really important mode. So let's see where it goes. But I think at the moment there's good traction on this type of thinking.
Yeah, I think this is super interesting because this morning I'm looking into how, because obviously we're living in a world where AI agent is exploding, right? Earlier, before we started the podcast, we were talking about OpenClaw, for example, where we're able to create people that can start creating their own AI agents living in their own sandbox, let's say living on your own Mac or your Mac Mini. You tell it what you want, you give it access and permissions to do certain things and so forth. And then I started looking at what are some of the latest development into these type of MCP protocols, model context protocols, to give identity, access and control to these AI agents, and how interoperable, where are we on this, right? And because like you said, like it is very much like Wild Wild West. We really don't know, because I've seen people talk about like, oh, I created my AI agent, I gave it access to my emails, my Slack, my calendar, etc.
Wow.
And you really, it's awesome, right? You have your own, like, basically chief of staff in a way that's, 24/7, 365. I've seen people give it access to digital wallets with some crypto funds in there, and they created a bunch of AI agents to do like day trading and so forth. It's pretty crazy. What's really, really for me that I came across this morning could be very interesting to you, because as well, is I think it came from Anthropic, and they updated a specification to their MCP specifically for AI agents. I have it on a tab, and I'm just going to share it real quick, and I'll show it to you, and I'll send it to you on a link later. But let me know if you can see this. And this is what I was reading earlier today, this morning, right? And what's really, this is the part that got me. enables AI. So hold on. It enables AI agents to prove not only which user they represent, but also that they have explicit permission to act on the user's behalf, right?
Yeah.
This is what I like to see, right? Like there is some
Right.
guardrails,
This big topic right now.
right?
It's also like, some call it know your agent. Yeah, it is know your agent problem, but there's like KYC, which is know your customer. KYA is something being in development. And there's so many layers to it. Part of that is, do you have a verified credential that, we can trust you, that you are the right person, or a right agent on behalf of the right person? Do you have the authorization to use this data to perform a certain type of action? What actions? That, which is very important to kind of process some of that data. And then, yeah, pretty much what you're showing, right? And
Yeah.
then you have OpenID protocols, which are OAuth. Yeah, sometimes, the verifiable credentials of KYC could also be acted as a proxy, and so on and so forth. So there are, like, it is quite complex, if you want to come to think about it. And I think the number one issue is, where is this data stored? Who has it? You cannot expect a platform to have this data for you. They're not going to share it. So I think one of the core value proposition of Neoke is the ability to provide this extra vault infra into an application that enables these transactions and communicates those touch points at scale.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where I think it's very, very exciting.
Yeah, for sure. I think this is like these solution that needs to be is to enable like what we're seeing coming forward in the future is super. It is foundational, pretty much, right? The way that I like to think about it. So
Right, but it's also not at the top of mind. That's not what you think when you're interacting with agents. So something is, like something will be a catalyst at some point which will enable people to think, oh my God, we need to take a control of that. But today, I think, we've seen that wave with blockchain, with NFTs, with all kinds of waves that come by, is that people are going to experiment and they're going to use different and push the boundaries of technology. But I think AI today is foundationally solving productivity problem. And if we do want to have these transactions at scale, this capability that the agent can really action on your behalf and so on and so forth, there is a lot of stuff missing. So for a playground, it's great, but at scale, no. So those are the things that will take time, and the stability will come with time. But I think, at least to our heads, this is where things are at the moment.
Yeah, Vikas, I was just going to say this is a bit philosophical, but I wonder if you could comment on the role that Web3 may play as AI continues to progress. We hear a lot about how AI is kind of nonlinear in its progression and it could gallop rather rapidly. And some have said that there's a role for Web3 in terms of being a bit of a safeguard. I wonder, from your perspective and in the context of travel, do you see that as a relevant aspect of this topic of how Web3 kind of plays that safeguard role, or is that misunderstood?
I just want to make it clear that our solution is not necessarily Web3, but it is on
Gotcha.
some, like, the core of the work is cryptography, keys largely. But on the topic of Web3, Web3 promises security and trust in transaction, right? Like at the base level. And that will continue. I think let's just understand why I think this is important. Back in the days when we had fiat money, right? Already saying back in the days. So let's say you have $100, you go to the coffee shop, give $100, and that gets distributed. But in the end, $100 are going to come back to you, and the goods and services are exchanged. In the world of digital payments, every touch point carries 1 to 2% more, maybe, right? So the wealth has increased. The banks have become richer. So everybody wants to go there. Unless we fundamentally solve the value problem within the chain of, Web3, we will not be able to solve scale. This is a value problem. I'm not talking about regulatory problem because it's fully understood, right? So the regulatory problem, and it could be a jurisdiction. US as a market is a fairly large jurisdiction, so it makes sense that, things could evolve within the American ecosystem. But if we want to kind of really build scale globally, then all of that has to align, and it's not very clear how that'll all align. And I think the real promise of Web3, beyond just the speculation and all of that, there's like absolute security, absolute understanding about like trust within those transactions. Stablecoins could actually mitigate that costs for merchants to provide velocity of transactions, but also lower costs. So I think that is a very big problem based on my booking days, where let's just take an example of a Thai hotelier who puts booking on booking, but does not have the right, infrastructure for collecting payments. Booking has to pay them through a virtual card. The payment comes much later, but also carries costs for booking and for the hotelier. So, that's, I think, friction in a lot of ways. But then on the loyalty, I mean, some of the numbers that I've seen on the loyalty just blows my mind away, right? How big the loyalty value is today. The top 8% of the global travelers, roughly contributing to 50 to 60% of the global travel revenue or value. And everyone wants to provide value services to them. And a lot of capital is exposed that is locked, it is not exposed or locked, that could actually play out in different ways. So I think there is definitely a case to be built, but time will tell. I just feel that Web3 at this stage really has to go through quite a lot of work, which has been happening, like cleanup. A lot of cleanup is already happening with stablecoins is a great example, where it's pegged against a more stable reserve versus Tether or versus anything that is not really built very well and is built on volatile assets. So I think there's definitely a value there. But other than that, I think really deeply thinking it's trust and security that Web3 offers today.
Thank you so much. Over to you, Mike.
I was just probably agree and expand on what Vikas said, because in my mind, when we talk about like Web3, right? Especially like one of the key things I'm looking at right now is the world, like the intersection of Web3 and agentic AI, and how that potentially can play. Because in the past few months, I'm always thinking about like how these two technologies at the intersection of that is going to be like an innovation multiplier. And the reason why I'm thinking that is because Web3 has a lot of capabilities to be able to be the payment rail, as you said, Vikas, earlier, like stablecoin payment, the frictionless and the borderless transaction, the major reduction in cost and time, right? So if you're an airline and you need to pay your fuel supplier across the globe, instead of having that wire clear in 3 to 4 days, which is going to cost money for you to wait for that. Not just from a payment rail, but also from a guardrail perspective, right? Because when it comes to like blockchain technology, you have immutability and traceability. So if you need to say like an AI agent did something, you have the trust via blockchain that it's being recorded, right? And it's not going to be modified by anybody. So the immutability and the audit trail capability of a blockchain for AI agent, transaction, I think that's super important. You have the ability to be able to kind of trust, like, okay, this is recorded on a particular blockchain, and some authorized user, if it's please sign delegated that this user can do certain things, this agent can do certain things, it can access certain smart contracts or wallets, etc. I'm thinking like Web3 has a really good play for AI, and we're going to see a lot more of that. I think those areas super interesting. I think there's a lot of relevancy to travel, because literally almost every single, even just the previous, what I just showed you from my Thrive, like one of the use cases they use is travel. And I'm seeing so many like agentic and Web3 use cases, and they're all using travel. An example, I just went on mute automatically. So I'm thinking that's real. But now you think like, why are they using travel as the example? They're all doing it, It's because it's so friction, and there's so many different areas of like data silo, and it's just a big opportunity, basically, right?
Yeah, it's full of friction, and good thing is everyone travels and they face it on a regular basis.
Yeah.
But my learning has been system, it's so fragmented and it requires so much hand-holding, so much regulations that, yeah, it requires time, it requires infrastructure development, it requires like real essence of like, okay, this is the end state that we need to target. And there are a lot of incumbents
Yeah.
that do not, that are thriving on this friction. So, ish, there was an easy fix. And that's probably the reason why a lot of people burned their hands before, because it's, it's full of friction. It's really
Yeah,
difficult to implement something like this. So
exactly.
I think what we need, like, in my opinion, one segment needs to be really hard to showcase that this is how we could solve that problem. And that segment, then the most trusted segment, will enable, the waterfall of implementation of that technology.
That's it.
I mean,
Because, sorry, go ahead.
no, I mean, if you take an example of like hotels, right?
Hmm.
Even short-term rentals, a disaster, right? You're in Italy or you're in France or you're in Spain, they all have different regulations. The needs for, guest registration cards are different. Some state by state would have different protocol on how they want identity documents and the forms to be sent to the police. It's just, oh my God, right?
Yeah,
So if you build all these rails, then I don't know how it is possible without an infrastructure that flows very in a trusted way.
absolutely.
That is the golden development path for Web3. It could also be a fantastic AI opportunity, right? Where all this friction requires implementation or communication, but AI could actually, or agent could actually implement that at scale. And I think so. For me, the agentic foundation or infrastructure, identity is the core layer, like for payments, identity is the core layer.
So earlier you talked about like network effect and adoption, which major
Right.
big player may be the one that's really going to be able to kind of push the needle on this. And we probably talked about this before as well. Apple, they announced that Siri is going to be using Gemini, coming up.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're going to, I don't
Yeah.
know if they're going to flip the switch completely or give user the option to choose between GPT or Gemini. But what I found super interesting, and I think it's super relevant as well, because they're also using travel as a use case when they kind of demo this, right? But Gemini announced personal intelligence, right? And they
Mhm.
highlighted the opt-in capability where you're going to be able to say, like, give it access to like your Gmail, your Google Photo, and
Yeah.
so forth to personalize your travel experience. When they talked about it, they specifically used travel as the example, right? Like
Yeah.
your personal intelligence is going to be able to go through your email and see what type of bookings you made, right? When you made what booking. So maybe it's going to be able to tell like you are very consistent in making travel plans to Washington D.C. during Christmas period or your
Yeah.
anniversary. And then when you book flights, you typically book with this airline and you typically fly these routes and so forth. It's gonna be able to go look at your photos to see like, hey, Vikas is a foodie. He always he takes pictures of a lot of sushi, for, just as an
Yeah.
example, right? Or
Yeah.
you're a venture traveler because you're always taking photos of when you're traveling, you're doing activities and so forth. So I think that's going to be super interesting, like having this like hyper personalization, but obviously you're going through a centralized services, right?
Yeah.
Trusting that they're going to be able to take that
Yeah.
information. You're giving away kind of like a little bit of that privacy, if you will, for convenience, the path. So two questions on that. A, obviously, I kind of want to get your thoughts on that and what you think. Ultimately, I also want to see like if this was something that was made available to you right away, would you opt into that? Would you give, say Gemini person intelligence access to all of that? Why or why not?
There are many use cases that the Google or Apple or Microsoft or whatever services you're using on the corporate side will solve. There's a technical answer from my end. And the technical answer is there needs to be interoperability between all this, period. And that's what the focus is at this point in time. The interoperability will happen based on certain trusted standards. That's what Google's done, right? And it's called DC API or Direct Connect API, I think. And that enables interoperability of those credentials. That's what we are interested in. Like we were able to accelerate Google login. there came a company that aggregated all of that called Okta. Became really, really big. And I think the technical piece, the interoperability, the network effect piece, right? So the trust in these interactions is critical to be able to provide those experiences. And I personally want a world we are able to get to a point without losing what's sovereign to us, which is our private information. And we can choose what information to share when, so that I also want the best offers in a really good way. So I think the onus is on us as a challenger in the market to enable a product that, provides those critical pieces. And I think that's what we want to do. And of course, the value in this is that the more connections, the completion of standard fragmentation that there exists comes together. So example of that is Google are offering a particular type of standard, but they're not offering what EU does, or they're not offering what Real ID offers in the US. So I think those are some of the pieces that where we will stand relevant. And I'm all in that there's more interoperability, there is more use cases that gets unlocked, like
So,
banking.
so in the travel space, who are you seeing that's doing a really good job in that area in terms of like interoperability?
I think Google is really, really good. Apple introduced as well a digital ID that is acceptable at TSA. Today, Apple is issuing that digital ID, and that too in a very limited way. But then there are a lot of verified digital IDs everywhere.
Yeah, I have the digital passport on my Apple Wallet.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is issued in a particular environment, but in a global environment, it needs to be airlines are issuing it, airports are issuing it, boards are issuing it, and they can all be stored in different places, right? And then you have a way to interact and understand, does this individual carry that credential? So example of that, you are on Delta and you are on United, but you can't continue to have like verification in every application. There needs to be an understanding that you own this credential, and this credential is sitting either in the Apple wallet or sitting in another partner wallet that is your credential that enables that interaction of data, that trust in that data. So this is basically what a future could look like. Today, that future is, you can compare that with payments, but as I said before, payments carry very binary use case of transaction. Here, there are too many different touch points to come together to enable that transaction or access or whatever. So I think those are the pieces that needs to be, connected.
So we're running out of time, Vikas, but I do want to get one more thought from you, which is, obviously you've gone through the motion as an early stage, startup founder. And if you were going to be able to pass any, advice or wisdom to future entrepreneurs or any current startup, early stage founder that's either building in this space, in the travel space, or others, what in any of the areas, and you can feel free, you can pick one, in terms of either building a team or investment, raising capital or partnerships, or doing, let's say, proof of concepts. What advice would you give to early stage founders in any of those areas?
I don't think I'm the right person for giving advice to early stage founders, but I think level founder opportunity fit needs to be very aligned. If that is not aligned, then everything becomes hard. What I mean by that is that you really have to care for that problem, and it takes a very long time to get to any kind of solution of that problem. And before you even jump to the solution, I think one of the mistakes that we did was that we started to expose product fairly early to gather more feedback and iteration, which is the right way to think, 0 to 1. But I think also that in today's environment, there are a lot of other ways to kind of find product market fit or let's say at least the early product market fit validation per se. And I think that is something to be worked through before you even like put a product out. So carving out that niche is really critical. So I would only say founder opportunity fit, the second layer that I think is really relevant. And if I would do anything in the future or start a new company ever, I would really focus on product market fit very early on. And I think without a doubt, talent if you're in the software, then I mean, depending on what type of like business you build, what is the core element that is a break? Like if that breaks, everything falls to ground. Is like the core, talent. That's where you have to have the core talent, and that matters so much. Like I'm so blessed to be working with such an amazing team. Like like incredible people. So I think those are the three areas. Like you're always literally recruiting or raising money as a CEO. So, it is what it is.
When you go into especially travel, we talk to so many startup founders so many times where they like, here's the problems they saw, and they kind of just dive right into it. And if they had just taken the time to validate, the problem that they think that they're seeing by having conversations with industry, thought leaders and executives, I think sometimes that can help validate that problem that they think they see as well. So thank you so much for that. Because obviously everybody, if they want to learn more about Neoke, they can visit Neoke. I think it's neoke.com. Would that be right? Yep.
Yeah, it's neoke.com or LinkedIn. Those are the two channels that we are active.
Yep. Any other areas where audience can learn more about Neoke? Are you putting out blogs or posts or anything like that?
I mean, on neoke.com, you can find the blogs. Also on LinkedIn, if you follow Neoke, you will get all the updates that are happening. And we consistently talk about all the developments within the aviation, especially with IATA and those standards. And that's the work that's happening, and a lot of update goes on there, like how the experience would look like in the future.
Yeah, and that POC that we talked about earlier in Asia with the 2 airports and the airline, that's also on the Neoke website and the blog as well.
Absolutely.
I think everybody should check that out.
And then also on YouTube, if you want to see the whole video, it's about, I think, 4 minutes where, how the digital trust is going to flow from booking to traveling and coming back. And I think it's a fantastic video illustrated by IATA on how the future of travel is going to be. And that's what's being worked on. So it's something to look at.
All right, fantastic. Well, Vikas, this has been such an amazing podcast. I appreciate you, sharing your time with us. I think this gives the audience a kind of a peek behind the curtain on the infrastructure that's coming for helping us have a better travel experience and who in the team that is behind this. So thank you so much, Vikas, for the time again. Really appreciate it.
Sure.
Thank you, Vikas.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm going to be a friend of the pod for time immemorial. And if there's any way I can support, very happy to.
That's lovely. Thank you so much,
Much
Vikas.
appreciated. Thanks so much for your insights. Love
Take care.
Thanks, Vikas.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Thanks for joining Joel and Mike for another episode of Travel Around the Block. If you have any questions or topics you would like to see discussed on the show, or if you'd like to be considered as a potential guest or sponsor, please reach out to us at hello@travelaroundtheblock.com. And of course, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Wishing you a wonderful day wherever you are around the block.